Your Honor, I think this is outrageous. You're going forward without the prosecutor.
It's exactly what you just witnessed. Blake Lively's lawyer literally stormed out of court after a series of hidden bombshells were suddenly exposed. Bombshells so explosive that they reshaped the entire case in a matter of hours.
I told her on the phone not to cancel that appointment, that it wouldn't be a problem.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you want to be here for the decision, that's your business.
According to sources inside the courtroom, the lawyer had been overheard telling Blake on the phone not to cancel a specific appointment and insisting that whatever decision was coming, it was now out of his hands, making it painfully clear that she hadn't even been fully honest with the one person whose job was to protect her legally at all costs. And that moment alone raised serious alarms, because if a client isn't being transparent with their own counsel, it usually signals something far more dangerous unfolding behind the scenes. Especially when Ryan Reynolds' name began quietly surfacing in unrelated Diddy drama, while Blake's dramatic courtroom stunt spiraled into headlines hinting at attempted murder implications. And with that chaos building, the lawyer reportedly made the decision to exit before his own career was dragged down with her, leaving many asking why a federal trial involving Blake Lively was suddenly being rushed into the spotlight after months of silence. And the answer appears disturbingly simple. Something significant happened behind closed doors that forced the court's hand. Because originally this case wasn't scheduled to go to trial until early 2026, having already been delayed, reshuffled, and intentionally kept away from public scrutiny. But everything changed the moment sealed evidence somehow leaked to the media. Evidence so concerning that it pushed a federal judge to cancel all delays and demand an immediate start, which naturally led to one chilling question. What kind of information could possibly make a court hit the panic button this hard? And according to individuals close to the proceedings, the judge didn't act alone. He was reportedly urged by higher legal authorities who believe the case now involved far more than Blake's public image, with officials from both the Justice Department and the U.S. Attorney's Office stepping in and using language like national interest and potential criminal exposure, marking the moment this stopped being about defamation or celebrity gossip and started looking like something much darker. Because the court now believed illegal activity may have taken place, and that whatever it was required urgent attention, and if the case was no longer about fame, then what exactly were they trying to uncover? Well, reporters digging through a recent court scheduling brief uncovered something deeply unusual. Blake Lively's legal team had requested several private hearings long before the leak ever occurred, and these weren't routine discussions. They were sealed hearings where the public and even some opposing attorneys were barred from access, which is rare, and immediately raised eyebrows, because it suggested Blake's team knew sensitive material was coming, and had already begun preparing to keep parts of the case hidden from view, prompting many to ask why her side appeared to be concealing information before the courtroom doors even opened. And to understand why that matters, it helps to look at what was supposed to happen next. Because before any trial, there is a pre-trial evidentiary hearing where both sides present their evidence, and the judge decides what can and cannot be shown to a jury. But in this case, that hearing descended into chaos, when the footage at the center of the legal storm wasn't even submitted by Blake's lawyers. Instead, it came from an outside source who was never supposed to have access to it, but shared it anyway, a fact that completely altered the direction of the case and raised the unsettling possibility that Blake's legal team had been trying to keep the footage buried. But the real shock came with the witness list, which had been heavily edited with large portions blacked out, something that usually only happens when identities need protection, such as whistleblowers or individuals under serious threat, and legal analysts noticed immediately, questioning who is being hidden and why, with some speculating it could be someone extremely close to Blake, possibly even within her inner circle, because the timing of the redaction suggested that whoever this person is could completely change the outcome of the case, raising the question of whether the person Blake trusted most might now be prepared to turn against her. And once the trial was fast-tracked, everything accelerated. Witnesses were called earlier than expected. Some abruptly withdrew, claiming they didn't feel safe testifying. Lawyers scrambled to file emergency motions, and the judge tightened media restrictions, transforming the proceedings into something that felt less like a lawsuit and more like a full-scale crisis. All while Blake's lead attorney, M. Gabriel, remained silent, a silence that spoke volumes as the case unraveled. Around him, leaving many to wonder what it means when the lead lawyer says nothing while the ground collapses beneath the defense, because the truth is this trial is no longer just about Blake Lively. It's about how much power protects people when they believe no one is watching. Except now the court is watching, the media is watching, and most importantly, someone behind the scenes has decided they're done staying quiet, turning this case into a reckoning over whether the system itself was manipulated from the inside, and if someone really did attempt to cover up, how far they're willing to go to stop the truth from finally coming out. And it all began like any ordinary day in the courtroom when the prosecution stood up and introduced what they calmly described as a clarifying exhibit, a phrase that most people in the room assumed would mean routine emails or a simple calendar entry, unaware of what was about to unfold. Instead of routine logs being presented, the lights in the courtroom suddenly dimmed, and a flat-screen monitor flickered to life, instantly shifting the mood in the room, and what followed stunned absolutely everyone present, including Blake Lively's own legal team, because the footage, time-stamped just days before Blake's deposition, clearly showed her meeting privately with Justin Baldoni, the lead witness at the center of the case. And this wasn't a casual encounter or an accidental run-in. They weren't in a public space. There were no lawyers present, no assistants, no official documentation, just a closed-door setting with no observers and no paper trail, raising an immediate and unavoidable question about why Blake would secretly meet with the very person she had publicly claimed she had no contact with, especially when only days earlier she had testified under oath that she had not seen or communicated with Baldoni in over 6 months, a statement designed to protect her from allegations of witness interference or testimony shaping, yet now the video contradicted that timeline entirely, and as the footage played, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence, so complete that no one even shifted in their seats, while cameras captured M. Gabriel, Blake's lead attorney, sitting up straight in visible shock, grabbing his notepad, leaning toward his second chair to whisper urgently, before standing and stepping aside with a pale expression that suggested he had just realized something was terribly wrong, because what happens when even your own lawyer looks like he is learning in real time that his client may have lied to him? And for those unfamiliar with courtroom procedure, the implications go far beyond embarrassment, since what this footage suggests is potential witness tampering, a serious federal offense. Because whether Blake was attempting to influence Baldoni or merely discussing the situation is irrelevant when someone involved in an active trial meets privately with a key witness before formal testimony. It triggers immediate red flags, and if Blake's attorney was aware of this meeting and failed to disclose it, he could now be implicated as well, while if he was unaware, then Blake withheld critical information from her own defense, a catastrophic move in any legal proceeding that could dismantle the entire case, raising the question of whether Blake's alleged dishonesty could end up destroying not just her position but also her lawyer's career. And just as it seemed impossible for the situation to deteriorate further, the prosecution unveiled a second shock, a different camera angle from the same meeting that revealed a third individual standing toward the back of the room, an unidentified man who was clearly not staff or a bystander, carrying a briefcase, and according to digital timestamps, he arrived with Blake and departed with her. And in the footage, he can be seen handing her a file, sparking immediate speculation about whether he was a member of her legal team or someone acting on her attorney's instructions. And if that was the case, then the meeting wasn't truly secret at all, but potentially planned, coordinated, and concealed, forcing the courtroom into recess as reporters flooded the hallways and Blake's online supporters fractured into opposing camps, one clinging to denial and the other demanding accountability, while Gabriel appeared visibly shaken, pacing and shaking his head as sources claimed he muttered that the footage was never supposed to exist, a statement that, if true, suggests Blake may have exposed her own legal team to consequences they never anticipated, giving new meaning to the phrase blindsided in court. And yet this was no longer simply about a client lying under oath, but something far more deliberate and expansive. Because later that evening, another wave of revelations emerged, not from the courtroom, but from an anonymous paralegal who leaked documents to 2 major media outlets. And these weren't random papers, but internal memos, emails, and planning notes exchanged between Gabriel and Blake's publicist, including one memo ominously titled Reputation Extinction Scenarios Outline Options, which outlined coordinated strategies between legal and public relations teams, revealing that Blake's PR representatives were actively shaping her legal narrative and even suggesting language to be used during her deposition to avoid triggering judicial scrutiny or the release of sealed evidence, a revelation that raised an unsettling question about why a publicist would be involved in crafting sworn testimony unless the truth itself posed a serious threat. And the disclosures didn't end there, because another leaked document detailed a meeting schedule showing Gabriel and senior PR executives convening just 4 days before Blake's sworn statement at what was labeled a strategy dinner with no official record, leading insiders to believe this off the books. Meeting was where they discussed how to carefully word Blake's responses to avoid technically lying while still evading questions that could prompt cross-examination or unseal damaging footage, including a line that read avoid naming Justin stick to unclear communication windows, language that stunned legal professionals who reviewed it, because at some point managing optics crosses into deliberate deception of the court, and that moment appeared to have arrived, as the leak triggered immediate action from prosecutors who filed a new motion within 24 hours alleging conspiracy to mislead the court, a charge that implies Blake and her legal team may have collaborated not just to defend her, but to actively manipulate perceptions within a federal trial. And if proven, this accusation alone could be grounds for Gabriel's disbarment while opening the door to additional criminal charges for Blake on top of her existing civil case, leaving observers to ask whether this was still a courtroom proceeding or the site of a slow-motion legal collapse unfolding in real time as legal commentators, media critics, and analysts struggled to keep pace with a case that had rapidly evolved into something far more serious than anyone initially imagined. Even veteran attorneys began weighing in as the situation spiraled further, with one CNN legal analyst putting it bluntly by stating this wasn't simply bad legal advice, but legal sabotage disguised as media strategy, while another compared the unfolding chaos to past celebrity scandals where public relations teams attempted damage control, noting that in those cases the spin never crossed into territory that looked like potential obstruction of justice, but here that line appeared not only crossed but completely erased, because everyone involved believed they could control the narrative until the cameras began rolling inside that courtroom and the narrative started controlling them instead. And once the court realized what had been happening behind closed doors, the question shifted from whether this was serious to how much worse it could still become, especially after prosecutors reportedly uncovered a document signed by Matt Gabriel stating that Blake had no recent or personal communication with Justin Baldoni less than 48 hours after the video of them meeting privately was filmed, meaning whether Gabriel knew the truth or not, his signature may now be used against him. While Blake's publicist refused to comment, her legal team went silent, and Gabriel reportedly stopped returning calls from journalists, legal networks, and even his own firm, leaving many to ask what it means when the people paid to protect you suddenly stop speaking altogether, because by that point it was crystal clear that the original case had been buried beneath a growing pile of contradictions, manipulation, and courtroom shocks, transforming what began as a defamation dispute into a full-scale legal disaster where multiple careers now appeared at risk over a single lie, with court insiders suggesting there were still unreleased video clips that might show additional meetings, more intermediaries, and deeper manipulation, raising fears that if those tapes surfaced, the consequences would not merely damage reputations, but bring permanent legal and personal fallout. And as if that weren't enough, the courtroom atmosphere was already tense following the Bombshell footage, when something no one expected occurred during what was supposed to be a routine mid-trial recess, a simple 15-minute break meant for coffee and regrouping, but instead it became the moment everything finally collapsed. Because as lawyers, staff, and observers stepped into the hallway, Matt Gabriel, the man who had stood beside Blake throughout the entire case, never returned, with whispers quickly spreading that he had left the building entirely not to take a call or consult with co-counsel, but to walk out for good, prompting stunned disbelief over what could drive a high-profile attorney to abandon his celebrity client in the middle of her own trial. A question that soon found its answer when it emerged that just before the break, prosecutors had cornered Gabriel during cross examination over undisclosed documents and asked him directly whether his client had withheld evidence from him or whether he had withheld it from the court, a moment that froze the room as Gabriel hesitated, stumbled through a vague response, and attempted to deflect responsibility, prompting the judge to call a recess before ruling on whether court rules had been violated. But Gabriel didn't wait for that decision, instead grabbing his binder, muttering something to his assistant and walking out without a word to Blake, an action that immediately fueled speculation because if he had nothing to hide, why would he flee? And the rest of the story didn't take long to leak, when a legal clerk stationed near the judge's chambers later claimed they witnessed a heated confrontation between Gabriel and Blake just minutes after the recess began, reporting that his words were sharp and unmistakable as he allegedly told her, "You set me up, you're toxic, I'm done," leaving witnesses to describe Blake as stunned, shaking, clutching her phone as she tried to follow him down the hallway, marking the end of whatever professional loyalty remained between them, not inside the courtroom but in that corridor, raising the chilling question of what could be so explosive that even Blake's own lawyer would call her toxic and walk away, because Gabriel's exit left not only the courtroom but the entire country in shock. And when proceedings resumed, he was gone, forcing the judge to ask whether the defense was prepared to continue, to which Blake's second-chair attorney could only reply that lead counsel was unavailable, a response that froze the room in disbelief, followed minutes later by Gabriel's formal withdrawal notice delivered via email, legally resigning as her attorney of record and leaving Blake without representation in the middle of an active trial, meaning for the next 48 hours she had no one speaking on her behalf, no motions filed, and no strategic protection. An extraordinary vulnerability that begged the question of how anyone survives what comes next when even their own lawyer abandons them publicly, eventually prompting the court to appoint an emergency attorney solely to protect her basic rights, though that intervention paled in comparison to what followed the next morning when the judge unsealed a document Gabriel had submitted just before his exit, a handwritten affidavit initialed and signed under oath that went far beyond a resignation, emerging as what many now believe could become the most damaging evidence in the entire case, because in it Gabriel didn't merely distance himself from Blake, he directly exposed her, opening with a blunt declaration that Blakelively had misled her own legal team, stating unequivocally that he was unaware of her private meeting with Baldoni and that she had intentionally omitted that information during deposition preparation, adding that multiple members of her media and public relations team had intervened throughout case strategy sessions, pressuring him to guide testimony in a way that protected Blake's public image even if it meant concealing uncomfortable facts, and he concluded by stating that he felt ethically compromised, professionally endangered, and legally exposed, prompting immediate court action and leaving the nation watching as the case crossed into entirely uncharted territory. Boxed in professionally compromised and ethically cornered, Gabriel made it clear that continuing would mean sacrificing his integrity entirely, because if Blake was lying not only to the court but also to her own attorney, then the obvious question became whether anyone involved had ever been told the truth at all. And deeper into the affidavit, Gabriel revealed something even more severe, alleging that Blake's team had submitted what he now believed were fabricated timeline memos, documents intended to prove her innocence, but containing altered dates, selective omissions, and misleading sequencing, and he stated that those materials were delivered to him already finalized, leaving him to rely on them in good faith during case preparation, only realizing their inaccuracy after the video evidence surfaced in open court, writing that had he known earlier, he would have withdrawn weeks before, admitting that he now feared the documents had been deliberately doctored, which raised the chilling question of how deep deception runs when even the evidence itself appears rewritten. And in one of the affidavit's final paragraphs, Gabriel delivered a line that echoed across every major outlet within hours, stating that he could no longer ethically represent a client who weaponizes the truth, a declaration that stunned legal commentators, because it is exceedingly rare for an attorney to speak so bluntly about a client while an active trial is still unfolding. But Gabriel clearly wanted the record to show That he was not stepping away out of fear of losing, but out of refusal to be complicit in what he described as systemic dishonesty. And if Blake truly weaponized the truth, then the foundation of her defense may already be gone, because the legal consequences of that affidavit could be devastating, laying groundwork for two serious charges: perjury and obstruction of justice, with perjury referring to lying under oath, which Blake is now suspected of doing repeatedly during her deposition, while obstruction of justice includes actions that interfere with legal proceedings, such as hiding evidence, influencing witnesses, or manipulating testimony. And if Blake is formally charged with either, she could face criminal penalties, including potential jail time. And this is no longer theoretical, because the affidavit alone gives prosecutors enough to begin constructing a criminal case, raising the question of how she recovers. If her own lawyer has handed the prosecution a roadmap, reporters immediately attempted to reach Gabriel after the affidavit became public, but he refused all interviews with his office, issuing only a brief statement confirming his resignation and citing ethical boundaries crossed without consent, offering no further explanation, while Blake's public relations team went into complete lockdown, issuing no statements, canceling appearances, and scrubbing social media activity, creating a silence that spoke louder than any denial could have, and to the court and public, that silence increasingly looked like guilt, prompting the unsettling thought that when silence starts speaking for you, it may already be too late to explain. And at this stage, the court is no longer handling a celebrity lawsuit, but confronting a full-blown crisis of trust, where a legal team has fractured, a client has been exposed by her own attorney, and the court now holds evidence, some sealed, some leaked, suggesting the entire case may have been constructed on carefully managed falsehoods. And if even part of Gabriel's affidavit is proven accurate, the fallout could extend beyond Blake, implicating her team associates and publicists in what may become one of the most aggressive courtroom manipulations in recent memory. Because when the people who built your defense become the ones tearing it down, what story is left to tell? Then came the moment no one anticipated, when Justin Baldoni walked into the courtroom, having previously existed only as a name in filings with limited public exposure and a deliberately vague connection to Blake Lively. But everything changed once he was sworn in, because his testimony was not cautious or restrained, it was devastating, and within minutes, he made one thing unmistakably clear: he had not come to protect anyone, he had come to tell the truth, and that truth may have destroyed Blake's final chance of walking free, as Baldoni began by revealing something never before stated on the record, claiming that Blake personally contacted him weeks before trial, pleading with him not to testify, and according to him, she did not merely request silence, but allegedly offered a private settlement if he agreed to stay off the record, an offer made without lawyers, without documentation, and entirely behind the scenes, emphasizing that it was her alone who reached out because she did not want his version of events heard, which begged the obvious question: why would someone offer a secret settlement if they had nothing to hide? And then came the moment that silenced the courtroom entirely, when Baldoni disclosed that after refusing her request, he began receiving threatening text messages from an unknown number, warning him to protect the brand and think about his family before making a mistake. Messages he initially ignored until one referenced his children by name, prompting him to contact authorities, with forensic analysis later confirming the messages originated from a burner phone traced to a device registered under a shell company connected to Blake's PR firm, raising the terrifying implication of coordinated intimidation and forcing observers to wonder how many others may have been pressured into silence. The emotional weight of Baldoni's testimony was unmistakable, as he described sleepless nights installing security cameras and the toll it took on his family, with his voice cracking as he stated that no one should have to choose between the truth and their family's safety, causing the courtroom to freeze and even the judge to pause proceedings momentarily, as Baldoni stood not angry but exhausted, like someone who had carried the burden too long, and finally decided to release it, leaving everyone to ask, if he had stayed silent, how many lies would have continued unchecked? How many lies would have remained untouched if the truth had never forced its way into the open? Because as expected, the public reaction was instant and explosive, with headlines flooding every major outlet within hours, turning social media into a full-scale battlefield as phrases like "Gossip Girl" to "gaslighting lawyers" trended nonstop. Blake's supporters grew suddenly quiet. Neutral observers began demanding answers, and critics who had questioned her version of events from the beginning felt Vindicated, as in less than a single day Blake transformed from a misunderstood celebrity under scrutiny into someone facing allegations of witness intimidation and ethical manipulation. Yet just when it appeared she had reached the lowest point imaginable, the judge made a move that proved otherwise by issuing an unusual and serious order for an immediate forensic review of Blake's phone records, a step normally reserved for criminal proceedings rather than civil disputes, signaling just how seriously the court now viewed the accusations as prosecutors confirmed they would examine messages, call logs, deleted content, and any digital trail that could link Blake or her team to the burner phone allegedly used to threaten Baldoni, making it clear that celebrity status would not offer protection from accountability and raising the unsettling question of what else might surface once those records were fully analyzed. And by the next morning, Blake arrived in court flanked by new legal representation, as her emergency attorney was gone, and in their place sat Victoria Chin, one of the most feared crisis litigators in the country, whose career had been built on salvaging cases already in freefall. Yet no one anticipated her first move when, before any new witness could be called, Chin stood and requested a partial immunity deal for Blake. A moment that sent murmurs rippling through the courtroom, because immunity is not sought lightly and is typically reserved for clients facing serious criminal exposure who may be prepared to cooperate in exchange for protection, prompting the visibly surprised judge to ask for clarification, to which Chin responded that her client was prepared to correct the record but required safeguards to do so fully and honestly, a statement that revealed Blake's strategy had shifted from defense to survival and raised the question of who else she might be willing to expose. And as if that revelation were not enough, Chin followed with a public declaration regarding Blake's mental health, claiming her client had been emotionally overwhelmed, manipulated by external pressures, and incapable of making sound legal decisions during key moments, a bold attempt to soften the court's perception that some viewed as genuine context while others saw it as a last-ditch public relations maneuver. But either way, it marked a clear pivot, as Blake now appeared to be reframing her actions not as calculated moves, but as the result of distress and instability, leaving observers to wonder whether she was finally telling the truth or simply rewriting the narrative again to avoid prison. And then came another shock when Chin delivered a veiled but unmistakable critique of Blake's former attorney M. Gabriel, suggesting prior counsel lacked objectivity, neutrality, and may have acted on personal motivations rather than legal judgment. A subtle but powerful statement that opened the door to a new legal conflict where affidavits could clash and Gabriel's damning testimony might be challenged, signaling that Blake could be preparing to turn against the very lawyer who exposed her in an effort to save herself, and raising the inevitable question of how fiercely Gabriel might respond if pushed. Because now Blake Lively stands in a position no Hollywood screenplay could neatly resolve, as she continues to fight multiple civil suits while simultaneously becoming the focus of a potential criminal investigation with her former legal team fractured behind her, her new attorney already negotiating immunity, and the court actively reviewing evidence that may connect her to threats, false testimony, and manipulated timelines, transforming what began as a media controversy into a high-stakes legal thriller with irreversible consequences. And if Blake believes the worst has passed, she may want to reconsider, because the next names on the witness list could determine whether this story ends in damage control or total collapse.